Welcome to another edition of the Empower Hour. I'm Al Kumar,
I'm Hanifa.
and we are your hosts each and every Wednesday, where we come to you with impactful topics of discussion that affect our everyday lives. Today will be no different. We have a super duper special guest on the phone with us today, Dr. Umar Johnson. Woo, 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 woo. How you doing, Brother Umar?
Peace and love, Queens. Peace and love. Glad to be with you.
And peace and love to you, sir.
Where are you on the planet right now?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
You're home. Home in Philly.
Yes.
Home in Philly. Okay, so folks were saying you looked like you were missing in action for a few months. Were you out of the country recently?
Yes, we did a group tour to Ghana in commemoration of the quadricentennial, the 400 years. The president of Ghana had declared 2019 to be the year of return for that purpose. So we were there with Professor Smalls and others celebrating the ancestors. So we were gone for about 2 weeks, and once I came back, I had to finish up my Ifa Tunde University course on Pan-Africanism, which ended in Washington, D.C., and then we celebrated the quadricentennial on August the 21st, my solar return, as well as the anniversary of the Nat Turner War. We did that down with Baba Khalifa at the Nat Turner Library. So it was a very packed yet fulfilling August.
Beautiful. Black August. Couldn't have picked no better time. And if memory serves me right, this is your birthday month too, right?
Yes, ma'am. August 21st.
Leo, right?
You just had your birthday. Happy birthday, belated.
Thank you. Thank
fellow
you.
Fellow Leo. Yes, we rule. Well, today's
Definitely.
discussion is on China's footprint in Africa. What does that mean for us here on this landmass? And we couldn't have found no better person to tackle this topic for us because we know that you keep your eye really close to the continent, as you just got finished describing to us that you just came back from Ghana. Did you see a lot of China's footprint when you were there in Ghana?
Yes, I've seen a lot of China's footprints. In fact, when we were at one of the slave dungeons, it had been explained to us that star-kissed tuna fish, which has one of its largest hubs on the coast of Ghana near the slave dungeon, is actually owned by the Chinese. I did not know that.
Wow.
And there's about 2 or 3 major food industries that has Africa as its primary supplier that are in fact owned by the Chinese. But the Chinese are very clandestine in the way in which they're taking over African corporations and businesses, whereas with the European, they like to stick their flag up. You know, they like to let you know this is white owned, this is Jewish owned. The Chinese are very clandestine. They like to keep it hidden that they're actually the owners. So they're not actually going to show their flag until Africa has been completely purchased.
Wow. Well, I know by reading Dr. Chancellor Williams' famous book, help me out.
Destruction of the Black Civilization.
Destruction of the Black Civilization, where he talked about how the Chinese has always been in Africa. For as far as history, how we can record history back. What do you think is so different these days than days past?
Well, they've always been there, particularly if you look at their ancestors or relatives, the Hyksos, who came down into Africa and participated in the slave trade. They were there, but they were never the primary exploiters and dominators of the continent, at least not in recent times. So the new role that China has in Africa is one of a neo-colonizer, an outright neo-colonizer, which they are hiding under the disguise of being a quote-unquote investor. And in the 21st century, the word investor has replaced the word colonizer. They do exactly the same thing. It's just that investor sounds like you're coming to help as opposed to coming to steal. And the reason so many African nations are accepting China's so-called aid, and I hate to call it aid because it's nothing but enslavement, But the reason why so many African countries are accepting it is because the terms are slightly better than the terms of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, France, or London. Still exploitive, still not in the best interest of Africa or her people, but the terms are slightly better. And what China is doing also well, that they've studied from their European predecessors, is that they have mastered the art of paying African heads of state and bureaucrats under the table. The Chinese are extremely corrupt at buying the loyalty and support and connections that they need. And the irony of this is that European countries, particularly America, London, and France, they are taking China to task at the level of the World Court for being so corrupt, which is interesting because that's like the pot calling the kettle black.
Exactly.
That's exactly how y'all exploited Africa, but now the white man wants to expose the brown man for basically learning his techniques and applying them better than he could.
Wow. Wow.
So, Dr. Umar, you mentioned neocolonialism, and most of us, at least who have at least read a book, we understand what colonialism is, how strategic it is, what it looks like. So, outside of China's footprint, are we seeing sort of China bringing their culture, their belief systems, all of that as part of this whole neocolonialism move? Are we seeing that on the continent?
Yes, we are definitely seeing that. There's four main reasons why China is so very interested in Africa. Number one, whoever controls African resources controls the world. Mm-hmm. That has always been. The white man would not be what he is in London or America had it not been for his exploitation of African resources, beginning with its people through slavery, and then after with the resources. So everyone knows that there are certain commodities that you must have in order to operate a nation, in order to develop your technological systems, in order to advance your military. Coltan, okay, manganese, the diamonds, the gold, the oil. Most of the world's untapped oil and gas reserves are in Africa. They're even estimating that Africa has more gas and oil than even the Middle East has. So you can't live without Africa. No country can survive without Africa. So whoever can control those resources actually controls everyone else around the planet. So that's number one, the geopolitical supremacy that it will give you by dominating and controlling Africa's wealth. That's the main reason why China is involved. Number two, China is overpopulated. Overpopulated. They have almost 2 billion people living in that country. And although China is a pretty large country, it's not large enough for the 2 billion that they have. So they're constantly looking for new places to offload their excess population. What better place to do that than in Africa, where there's a lot of land and area that is underdeveloped or undeveloped that the Chinese can come in and exploit and create new communities for its poor people. That's number two. Number three, because of the devaluation of African currency, China is looking towards Africa because they'll be able to pay Africans less than what they pay Chinese. This is a critical reason for why many Chinese corporations are now relocating to Africa outside of China. It's still different than why many American corporations have left this country and have went to second and third world nations, because they can save more money. They can make more because you can pay the workers less. They don't have the advanced child labor laws or the minimum wage laws that we have here in America. They don't have the paid medical leave. They don't have the Home Medical Leave Act. They don't have to worry about that. So putting your corporation in Africa, where where brothers and sisters are struggling to make ends meet, they will work for whatever you can pay them because there's no other option. So that's another thing. They can really exploit the African worker. Okay, and then another reason why they're so invested in Africa is because it is a very convenient market to offload all of your cheap goods. Keep in mind, China is the Walmart of the planet.
Yes.
Walmart can't even compete with China. Anything that needs to be made is being made in China. It's not authentic. It's not original. It may not work as well, but China is the master of the counterfeit product. As such, China can dump tens of millions of dollars worth of useless junk fake Jordans, fake chains, fake this, bad food. Basically, anything that China can't sell anywhere else, they can sell in Africa. Africa is China's dollar store.
Wow. And what I'm reading, I'm seeing now where they're dumping harmful chemical waste now in Africa. They're trying to fight back against the Chinese are coming over and dumping their waste that they don't want on their homeland in Africa.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. To your point, the Chinese are involved in a lot of illegal mining, fishing, and drilling all throughout the continent. It's illegal, but they're getting away with it. Why are they getting away with it? They are paying locals to watch their back and to protect their interests. They're also paying off traditional rulers who are not letting the government know what they are illegally allowing the Chinese to do. So the reason they're getting away with all this, the illegal dumping, the illegal fishing, the illegal drilling, in fact, as far as the illegal dumping goes, even in Ghana we heard about that, and a lot of brothers and sisters are concerned that it's killing the wildlife. So they said the Chinese are coming in and they are literally causing a holocaust with many of the animal populations on the continent. Why is nothing being done about it? Because they are paying people not to prosecute.
Wow.
No, a lot of the infiltration, as far as, I mean, very subtle from what you explained. Could a lot of this be maybe avoided, or could there be could this be blocked by, let's say, leaders that maybe was not corrupt? Is corrupt leadership in Africa a part of the problem?
Yes, but let us be clear.
Okay.
African leaders are no more corrupt than any other. Donald Trump is corrupt.
Yes.
Barack Obama was corrupt. George Bush. Most leaders around the world are corrupt because
Okay.
that's the way politics works.
Yes.
The reason we hear so much about African corruption is because of the lack of access to wealth. So even if you are an elected official, you may still be struggling to make ends meet. So whenever you have a country where the quality of life isn't sufficient enough to allow people a decent opportunity to take care of their families, anyone who comes in with an opportunity will always be able to pay their way through their schemes in Africa. So this Chinese exploitation by way of deception and corruption, it can happen in any country. It's just that in Africa, because of colonization, see, the white man wants to blame the black politician
Yes.
for the corruption in Africa.
Right.
No, he is to blame for the corruption in Africa.
Yes, sir.
You're the one that colonized the country. You're the one that controlled the resources. You're the one that devalued the currency.
Come on.
And even more recently, you're also the one that when colonization ended, and this is a very important point, when independence came to the different African countries in succession, the Europeans and the French, the Portuguese, they sabotaged their colonies on the way out the door. So what they would do, they would sabotage the water. They would blow up the different buildings that they built. They would sabotage the railroad. They made those countries almost unlivable on their way out the door. So then the new African leadership said, what are you doing? We need this. And then the white man said, well, we built this. So if y'all don't want us to keep on destroying it and sabotaging you on the way out, you're going to have to pay us for the infrastructure that we built. Now, keep in mind, why do we have to pay you for anything after you done robbed us of everything from our people to our products for more than 100 years? Because they were in charge. And so African countries being desperate not to lose any more of the infrastructure that they had, they signed off on these unfair payment plans, loans, if you would, debts that they would have to pay to the European on his way out so they wouldn't further sabotage the infrastructure that they built.
And we see that transpiring right now in Haiti. And Haiti is another good example. Not to mention that, and they sabotaged the infrastructure in Haiti too. With the water, they was found. They actually took it to the United Nations where they found cholera, something in the water, and they had to admit that they did it. This was a few years back.
To your point, America wants to exterminate the Haitian. I believe that there is a concerted effort to exterminate the Haitian population because America would love to have Haiti as a geopolitical military base so that it can keep an eye on Cuba and keep an eye on Venezuela and keep an eye on any other Central South American and Caribbean governments that are hostile to American foreign policy. So I believe the Haitian people need to be extremely careful. I mean, they're doing it in Africa too, but it's going to take much longer. They're doing it to Black America, but they have to be more Machiavellian because as they exterminate us, they don't want to exterminate the whites. But in Haiti, it's right in the back door of America. You know, it's not as large as Africa. It's extremely close. They don't have to worry about targeting whites while they target blacks. And so I'm very concerned about the Haitian situation. In fact, that earthquake that struck Haiti years ago, which was done by the United States government, that was one of its tactics to reduce the population there.
Yeah, it was interesting how all that's one island, but Haiti was the only one that got the brunt of the earthquake. It's interesting.
Exactly. Well, Hugo Chavez, who they killed, by the way, the CIA killed Hugo Chavez. Before he died, he said that the Haitian earthquake was meant for Venezuela. He said that.
Wow. Wow. Back on Africa, I just find it fascinating how so many of our African brothers and sisters are running from Africa, flocking to these other continents, while the Chinese are while the Chinese are flocking to Africa. I mean, how does, the lot, I'm just trying to figure that one out. It's like you are running from your homeland for your life, and other people are coming to it as a gold mine for them, for prosperity. The dynamics in that is crazy to me.
They are, but the difference between the African that is seeking a better life outside of Africa and the people who come into Africa to invest and become rich almost overnight is that the people who come to Africa come with access to wealth. The indigenous African doesn't have access to wealth. If he were able to access wealth, he would certainly stay at home. Yeah. He would certainly stay at home. But the problem is he's not able to access it, and I haven't seen anything from any African government, and there may be a few exceptions, but I haven't seen anything yet that shows me that African governments or the African Union, okay, as an institution, is doing anything to empower indigenous Africans to build up their own corporations, institutions, industries, and enterprises. I don't see that. And that is a big concern, because if you do not invest in African people so that they can invest in Africa, ultimately it's just going to be a matter of time before Africa has been totally recolonized again, because the Chinese has access to unlimited wealth. The European Jew has access to unlimited wealth. Not to mention, we have the Arabs in Africa, we have the East Indians in Africa, we have the Lebanese in Africa. We have everybody in Africa getting rich. Why? Because they can access wealth. They show up with loans from their native country, they bring that money to Africa, and they get rich overnight. The only way you're going to combat that is if African nations and the African Union start investing in African people.
Yes, and I'm seeing that with the president of Ghana, with the whole year return, this whole thing of joining the Africans here in America with the Africans on that continent. To me, I think he's very forward thinking, more so than a lot of the other presidents on the continent, other countries, because he understands the power of our unification.
Not only that, I believe that although he definitely respects and wanted to commemorate the 1619, 2019, 400 years of Africans being stolen into America, although I know he, sincerely wanted to commemorate this quadricentennial from a strategic standpoint, and I've said this before, I believe the year of return was a strategy by the president of Ghana to interest Africans abroad into coming home and investing in Africa, but so that we could slow down the Chinese onslaught and takeover of Africa. That's what I believe this was really about. It was, and I'm glad he did it. I'm glad he did it, and I'm glad he did it the way he did it, because he couldn't come out and say, listen, y'all better come in and y'all better invest in Africa before these Chinese buy us up all over again. And I believe the year of return was a strategy to help push back on the Chinese invasion.
Wow. Yeah. Smart move. Smart move.
One of the questions that I often hear asked, Dr. Umar, is all of these different countries in Africa, having their different struggles, specifically with their own leadership oftentimes, or allowing the Chinese to come in and pretty much colonize their countries. Oftentimes I would hear the people in the diaspora ask the question, then why even try to go back there? Because it's almost like leaving one beast to go and fight another beast. Why not fight the beast that you're familiar with?
Good question.
Great question. The reason why it is more advantageous for us to go back to Africa and fight against corrupt African leadership or fight against Chinese, European, Jewish neocolonialism is because you can actually win in Africa. You can't win here. That's the reason. So, for example, we can build another Tulsa. We can build another Rosewood. We can build another Wilmington, North Carolina. We can build another Durham, North Carolina. We can build another Charleston, South Carolina, but they will be burned down again, because as a numerical minority in the United States of America who do not control the land, the borders, the water, the resources, or the military, there's no way we can win and wage a war against the United States government. But in Africa, where we numerically dominate, where we have control of the land, where we have the knowledge of the land and the control of the resources, although it will be just as tough of a fight, you can win it because you are on native soil with 2 billion native brothers and sisters. That's why the war must be fought in Africa, not America.
Well, what do you say to those? I hear them now. What do you say to those who will say, I'm from America. I'm indigenous American.
Don't know nothing about Africa.
I don't know nothing about Africa. I'm not going back there. We were the original Indians. And so,
It's true. We were the original Indians. It's true. We were here before slavery. It's true. We are indigenous to America, but indigenous to America is not the same as having your origin in America. Everyone in America who is African came from Africa. There is no proof, no conclusive proof that life originated on this continent at the same time or earlier than it originated in Africa. Even when you study all of the early indigenous cultures of the North, South, and Central American continents, there is undisputable evidence that they brought that culture with them from Africa. You look at the pyramids in Mexico. They brought that culture with them from Africa. You look at the money, the hairstyles, the spirituality. They brought it with them from Africa, nor did they hide the fact that they were African. Even in Africa, there is documentation of how they came back and forth to America. Christopher Columbus, who spent a few nights in one of the slave dungeons in Ghana, by the way, before he came to America, was given a map that showed him how to get there. Us coming to America before the slave trade is no secret. The only issue is you got self-hating Negroes who don't want to be African because they've been taught that there's nothing good about Africa, who want to cut themselves off genetically, biologically, and anthropologically. Now, you can argue that you're not from Africa in theory. In theory, you can argue anything. But show me the anthropological evidence that proves you did not come from Africa. If you DNA test any of these Negroes who say they're not from Africa, guess what's going to come up? Ghana. Guess what's going to come up? Nigeria. Guess what's going to come up? Sierra Leone. I would like to see all these indigenous, aboriginal, wannabe Indians do a DNA test, and let's see if it comes up Choctaw and Cherokee. It's going to come up that they from Africa like the rest of us.
Yeah, I don't understand why we're so tied and connected to this land. Wait a minute, well, maybe I do get it, but I don't understand how
Because we love white folks. We love white folks. For me, because I don't really waste a lot of time with these Aboriginal arguments, for me, it's just a good, convenient excuse to hide the fact that you love white folks, you want to stay around white folks, and you want to integrate with white folks. This whole Aboriginal, Native American nonsense is nothing but an excuse to love white folks. Because here's the question. What is your solution? So let's say for a minute we concede that they are indigenous to America, that they did not come from Africa. It's absurd, but for the sake of conversation, let's say that is true. Okay, now, you're not from Africa, but you do recognize that we're all the same people, but you didn't come from there. What is your solution to the problems that face African people in this country? What is the solution? Even if you believe you're from here, what is the solution? Do you really think the United States government is going to give you a couple states? Do you realize that the white man killed his own brother, the bloodiest war in American history until Vietnam in the Civil War? He killed his own cousin, uncle, grandpa to keep America from being split into two countries. The Civil War was about preventing America from being split into two countries. So you mean to tell me he would kill hundreds of thousands of his own family members, but he's going to turn around after doing that and 150 years later give a couple states to some Negroes that he wouldn't even give to some white folks? You are out of your mind. For me, I like to begin with the solution in mind. Even if all your theories are correct, what is your solution? Because guess what? You can be theoretically correct and strategically incorrect. See, even if your facts on your history are correct, your facts on the future and how we ought to obtain liberation can be totally incorrect. We are not from America. We are from Africa, every last one of us. And as I always say, any Negro who say you ain't now African, roll up your sleeves, give some blood, and let's see what comes back. We'll prove that your ass is African.
Ashe.
Shouldn't we get to a point where, and I hate to use this word as it pertains to us, because I know we talk a lot about unity amongst ourselves and so forth, but I feel like it eventually comes down to where there has to be some sort of I'm just for lack of a better term, separation as far as this repatriation is concerned. Because the reality is this: if you have no love for the continent, if you have no love for your people in that way, do I really want you there with me? Because if we're at war and I'm telling you, come, let's go, because we're in a danger zone, we need to move out of the zone, and you're like, but no, because I planted this tree here. You know, so I'm staying here under this tree. I don't care how dangerous the zone is. After a while, if I want to live, I'm gonna have to leave you and your tree behind.
They're not gonna come anyway.
So right. So my thing is, shouldn't some of us be getting the mindset to just kind of like work with like-minded people towards that direction versus stressing ourselves out, trying to nudge these people who are convinced that they are native to the land and they're staying here?
To your point, as the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said, quote, some of you are no good in America, and you will likewise be no good in Africa. I have no intention to resettle every black man back home in Africa. Neither does Dr. Umar Johnson. All these people who don't want to be African, I don't want them coming back, because they will introduce a new breed of tribalism on the continent that will lead to mass chaos and civil war. We don't need that, because that would be a perfect set of circumstances behind which the CIA could operate to undermine anything we try to do on the continent. So I'm not one of those people who want to convince the Aboriginals that they are African. Stay your ass here. I don't want them coming, because they will bring nothing positive that we can use back home. Nor do I want a lot of other people coming. I don't want the LBGTs coming. I don't want the black men with the white wops coming. I don't want anyone who is engaging in anything that is antithetical to where we need to be heading as a race. So I don't believe in wholesale migration, nor do I believe in wholesale repatriation. I think we need to be very scientific with the weeding out process, very scientific with the filtering process. I think we need to be very careful who we decide to send back to Africa to represent us, because it only takes one agent, it only takes one coon to go over there to Africa, create a whole bunch of nonsense, and they will set back the Pan-African movement 200 years. It's happened already. It happened in Liberia when the American-Liberians came back through
That's
the
right.
American Colonization Society and
right.
started treating our brothers and sisters like they were their servants. So we
Yes.
became the slave masters to the African like the white man was our slave master. It happened in Sierra Leone. There is a history of Africans going to Africa causing problems, but there's also a history of Africans going back to Africa to help improve it. So right now, I'm working on a project where we're about to build a community in West Africa as well. I'm going to be very, very selective about who I allow to go back there. I can't have people going back who got light skin supremacy problems,
Yeah.
dark skin supremacy problems, white Jesus problems, homosexual problems, blonde hair problems, white girlfriend problems. Africa has enough problems of its own. We don't need to be bringing her none of ours.
Thank you for that, Dr. Umar, because we talk a lot about going back, and my whole thing is always, I think repatriation, there's a psychological process to it as well. We talk a lot about it more in the physical, but I'm like, you have to repatriate in your mind first before you even physically get there. You have to start living in your Africanness here, where you at, where you find yourself, before you can even talk about repatriation.
Yeah. If you guys are just joining us, we are interviewing the one and only Dr. Umar Johnson. We're talking about China's footprint in Africa. What does that mean for us here in America? We're going to open up the lines in a second, so you guys can call in if you have any questions. I want to share this quote with you, Dr. Umar, and you tell me what you think about it. You may have already heard it before, from Vladimir Putin. He says, when an African becomes rich, his bank accounts are in Switzerland. He travels to France for medical treatment. He invests in Germany. He buys from Dubai. He consumes Chinese. He prays in Rome or Mecca. His children study in Europe. He travels to Canada, USA, Europe for tourism. If he dies, he will be buried in his native country of Africa. Africa is just a cemetery for Africans. How could a cemetery be developed? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I saw that quote, and I agree with that quote. And what that quote is speaking to is that the average African head of state has absolutely no faith in the future of Africa. And most of them are trained in the West. And even the ones who are not trained in the West, they have the psychology and the values of the Western white man. The average African leader is biologically African, but psychologically a white man. We can draw the same parallel to Black America. Okay? If you look at our politicians, or let's look at our HBCU president, historically Black college, in many respects, is a nation, an independent nation. Okay? Most of them don't have a lot of faith in their own HBCU. Okay? They will go out and look for money from the outside as opposed to creating enterprises within the university that can be used to bring in capital. Most of them don't live in the Black communities where the HBCUs are located. They live in a white suburb somewhere. Many of them don't even have the mindset of the founders of the HBCUs. Most of them are Black bourgeoisies who simply took the job for status and income. So I don't think it's unique to the African leader. It's unique to the Black bourgeoisie, whether it's Africa, the United States, the UK, Canada. That's how we think once we get the white man's education. And I think that Africa needs to start rethinking, as well as Black America and all of us throughout the diaspora, what exactly are we looking for in our leaders? Because too often the first thing we look for is a European education.
Yeah.
The Black community globally is under a dictatorship by European education. The first thing we look for is an educated Negro to lead us, failing to recognize that the educated Negro, as Dr. Carter G. Woodson so eloquently said, in Miseducation of the Negro is, quote, seldom of any use to his race.
Yeah.
Because the education he gets from the European establishment is an education that takes him away from his people. Let me give you a quick example to further that quote that you give. When you go to Africa or the Caribbean islands, they often import Chinese and white folks to build the roads, build the bridges, build many of the major government buildings, right? But you have the University of Ghana, University of Jamaica, University of Nigeria, University of Haiti. You have all these universities. Most Black countries have more than one university, like most white countries do. If you have an engineering department, and your engineering department is 20, 40, 50, 60 years old, Can you please explain to me why your engineering students and your engineers who have graduated from your indigenous university are not building your railroads and building your streets and putting your buildings together? If you're going to go to China and Europe to pay tradesmen and women to come in and build your infrastructure, why do you have a university if you don't have any faith in it? That is one of the biggest contradictions of Africa, the fact that Africa is bringing in and importing things that it does not need because of the European value system of its leadership.
Again, as you said earlier, unwilling to invest in the people.
Yeah.
Unwilling to invest in
Exactly.
the people. Family, if you guys want to call in, the hotline number is 240-455-5934. Come on, jump in on the discussion. Keep your questions and comments brief. That's all we ask. 240-455-5934. Dr. Umar, what are your thoughts on Julius Malema, the EFF over in South Africa, and what they're doing these days?
Well, at this point, I support him. I met with many of the youth of the Economic Freedom Fighters Party that he started. I actually had the honor of addressing those youth who had the Fees Must Fall movement where they protested the university. I had an opportunity to meet with them and speak with them during that protest movement. It was historic. And my thing with South Africa as a whole, particularly the political parties, is there's going to have to be some sort of underground unification. Because as long as you have the EFF versus the ANC, now there's another party that's coming up, you don't want to fragment the movement so much that the white man simply wins by attrition. It's no different than what we do over here when we split the vote. You got 4 black people running, 1 white person. Each black person splits the vote, so the white person ends up winning because y'all couldn't decide who the one black person should be. And so I just don't want South Africa to come to that. But in order for South Africa to totally be free, they're going to have to wage an economic revolution. There's going to have to be a second revolution in Africa because when apartheid fell, nothing else fell except the segregation of the races. The ANC, which is the ruling government of South Africa, doesn't own a bank. It doesn't own a diamond mine. It has no wealth of its own. How can you be the ruling government and yet you don't control any resources? It is absolutely not acceptable. The whites of South Africa still overwhelmingly dominate the resources of that country. Until you get an equitable redistribution of the wealth of Africa, then freedom for African people, South Africans in particular, is nothing but a joke. But it's no different for us. When we came out of slavery, we wasn't given any of the wealth that our ancestors built over 2.5 centuries in this country. There was no redistribution of wealth in America after slavery. They just simply walked you off the plantation. But you can't be equal unless you have equal wealth. Equality begins with having an equal opportunity to do for yourself what everyone else does for themselves. And the one thing that we need to get back to is a redistribution of the wealth. In fact, a redistribution of the wealth is just as important, if not as equally important, as reparations is itself. Because the wealth of America needs to be redistributed. In other words, you can get reparations, and guess what? There can still be a lopsided equation as it relates to wealth differential in America. We can get reparations, and the white man will still out-earn us. He will still have more wealth than us, even with reparations. So what we want is an equitable redistribution of the wealth. Until you have that, freedom is nothing but a mockery. And what they did was they took away, they gave you freedom, but they didn't give you redistribution of wealth, but they gave you the vote. And so democracy has replaced economic equality as the #1 focus for black folks all across the world. In South Africa, it's all about who you're going to vote for. Black America, it's all about who you're going to vote for. United Kingdom, Caribbean, it's all about who you're going to vote for. I don't give a damn who's running for office. What I care about is getting my degree of the wealth that is entitled to me and everybody who looks like me. We don't need to be fighting for the right to vote. We need to be fighting for redistribution of the resources.
Ashe.
So you touched on you're talking about reparations. So that's kind of been a hot topic of late. What are your thoughts on the ADOS movement?
I don't support the ADOS movement.
Okay.
I believe it is very divisive. First of all, you do not have to disidentify from Africa or African people in order to fight for reparations. First of all, that's ridiculous. One does not require the other. Number two, it makes the African immigrant, which only numbers about 3% of all African people in this country, it makes the African immigrant the scapegoat for everything that's going wrong in Black America. But at the same time, the leaders of the ADOS movement have not targeted the LBGTs for how they have stripped away from Black people everything that we fought for in terms of civil rights. They haven't targeted the Latinos. They haven't targeted the feminists. They haven't targeted the immigrants. They're simply picking on Black folks. First of all, the United States government is not in love with African immigrants, which is why it is so difficult for Africans to get to America in the first place. If you are here, it is because of a diplomatic relationship that your family has with America. If you are here, it is a student visa. It is a work visa. You just don't decide you want to come to Africa and you come. I have friends in Africa who've been trying to get here to visit me for over 10 years, and they can't even get a visa to get here. So to try to make the African immigrant a scapegoat for what's going on in Black America is absolutely ridiculous. Furthermore, okay, I totally take issue with the fact that they strongly identify as Americans, as the name suggests, American descendants of slaves. Excuse me, you don't mind being called an American, you don't mind being called a slave, but you have a problem being called an African. To me, this is an attempt by a group of Negroes who are absolutely in love with white folks, absolutely in love with the American government, to show the American government that they are not African, want nothing to do with Africa, will not unite with African people just so they can get a couple crumbs from their master's table. The reparations movement has four main issues. Issue number one, and I'm not really worried about the ADOS because just like Black Lives Matter, it'll be a hot trend for a while and then it'll go away. One of the most important things that one of my Garveyite elders told me, he's now an ancestor, he died a couple years ago here in Philadelphia. He said, listen, don't always react when these new movements come. There's always going to be new movements. He said what you need to do is wait and see which of them are going to stand the test of time, because most of them will not, because the people who bring these movements into fruition are really just looking for a new hashtag. They're not really looking for change. So remember how hot Black Lives Matter was? You hardly hear about Black Lives Matter anymore. They're still out there, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't carry the same weight that it carried right after Michael Brown was murdered, or right after Freddie Gray, or right after Eric Garner. It died away. And one of the reasons it died away is because it was largely funded by white folks. I can promise you the ADOS movement will also be largely funded by white folks. So it's just a hashtag. It'll be here for a few years, and then it'll die off. But the biggest issues with the reparations movement, number one, there should be one reparations movement, not a whole bunch of them. There was one slavery. It sent us to the Caribbean. It sent us to Europe. It sent us all around the world. There should be one reparations movement, not 5 or 6 different ones, because it allows the oppressor to come in, play us against each other, and none of us ends up winning anything. So it needs to be a unity of mission. Number two, we need to make sure that we include with that the fact that we are also owed restitution and damages for what has been done to the Africans since slavery. This is not just about slavery, it is about slavery and the aftermath of slavery. In other words, what about what the European has done in Africa since the end of slavery? What about what they have done to Black people in America since the end of slavery? What about the mass incarceration? What about the miseducation? What about the economic castration? You see, so we have to make sure that we don't just end this in 1865. Okay, we have to talk about what you've done to us since 1865. So let's not put a time limit on it. Then the next issue, where are the Arabs? I don't see anybody talking about the role that the Arab played in the slave trade. They were the first ones in it. They're still in it to this very day, and I'm not hearing anything about the Arabs. On top of that, what about the psychological damages of slavery? In fact, we're probably owed more for the psychological than we are for the unpaid labor. I mean, 243 years of unpaid labor is one thing, but when you look at 400 years of psychological terrorism and psychological self-hatred that is a direct result of the Ma'afa, I'm quite sure they owe us more for that than for our ancestors working on the plantation. And then the last piece that I would say is we also have to look at, if we're going to talk about reparations, you also have to repair the fact that Africans in this country after slavery, which is why we can't limit it to 1865, have been robbed of tens of thousands of acres of land all throughout this country illegally at gunpoint, Ku Klux Klan, White Knights Council, and just white vigilantism. You have Black people who own land in this country by way of the ancestors who don't even know about it, because that is a whole research project that needs to take place. And if we're going to be doing some reparations, we need to do some restoration, and that means give us the land back that our ancestors owed. If you notice, nobody's talking about the restoration of land that was stolen from Black folks tens of thousands of acres from 1865 until 1965. What about the land they stole? This cannot just be about unpaid labor on the plantation. It must be a comprehensive assessment of what the European has done to destroy African life and African property.
Yeah, Ashe. Denori had a question on the YouTube line. He said, "What are your thoughts on those who want to go back to Africa during a repatriation, but they don't feel welcome when they get there from other Africans?"
Okay. Here's what I say to that. Consciousness always finds itself if it looks for it.
That's a good point.
Dr. Umar Johnson, I probably go to Africa more than most scholars do. I've been to every coast in Africa, not every country. I come across African coons on the continent who don't want me there, who see me as an American, who don't think I have any entitlement to the land. You will come across some of them. But guess what? I've been going to Africa for almost 20 years now. 99% of the Africans I meet have the same Pan-Africanist consciousness that I do. They have the same Garveyite mentality that I do. They have the same focus on international solidarity that I do. So if you are of a high consciousness, then you will naturally attract to yourself Africans who are of like mind. I do not run into those problems. If I did, I wouldn't have had 6 consecutive group trips to Africa the past 6 summers. That right there has been exaggerated too much. If you consider yourself African, and if you want to be a part of the African Renaissance, you will find a way to be a part of it. Coming up with excuses that Africans don't want black folks is ridiculous. It's no different than when I hear some of my African brothers and sisters say, when we come to America, we're mistreated by African Americans. They laugh at us. They talk about the way we talk. They talk about our nappy hair, our black skin. It works on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Just like you will find Africans who don't want you, Africans find African Americans who don't want them. Look for those who are like you. Most of them are. I have never ran into that as a stumbling block to progress. Never.
Yeah, good stuff. I agree. Okay, we have a caller on the line. Caller, are you there? Caller?
Hello?
Hello, how you doing?
That's up.
Thanks for calling in.
Hey,
Where you
y'all hear me?
calling from?
Yes, we can. Where are you calling from?
Okay. I'm calling from upstate New York,
All right,
All right.
Rochester, New York.
Rochester. What's your question,
The
sir?
burial place of Frederick Douglass. I got a quick question.
Mhm.
All right. Because I've been studying Martin R. Delaney and Frederick Douglass a lot lately, and they had a little argument on immigration back to Africa and on colonization. It's a lot of stuff they put out there. But my question is, how could we prevent the type of civil unrest that manifested back in Liberia from mainland Africans towards the former slaves that emigrated back to Africa? They just wasn't feeling us. They wasn't receptive to us. How do we prevent that from happening again?
Well,
Dr.
first of
Umar?
all,
If y'all
I
know
wanna
about
say-
that. If y'all know about that.
Thank you
Yeah,
for your
we-
I wanna
question.
say
we touched
that-
on that a little bit earlier.
Thank you for
Yeah,
your
but I want to
question.
say that war between the Americo-Liberians that repatriated from the States and the indigenous Liberians, from my understanding, and I've been to Liberia, that was not triggered by the native Liberians. That was triggered by us. When we went back there, we expected to be treated a certain way because we were unconscious of the European psychology that we brought with us back to Africa. And because we were being sent back by this white man, we thought we had a right to dictate to our brothers and sisters as the white man had did before us. So I don't believe that that war was triggered by the brothers and sisters already there. Are they innocent? No, they're not. I'm sure there's things that could have been done to alleviate that fighting, which lasted almost 100 years. But the truth be told, most of the responsibility was ours because we went back to Africa with the European mindset. And the best way to prevent that, as I said earlier, is we need to be very selective with who we allow to go back. Now, Dr. Umar can't control who goes to Africa and who doesn't. But with my particular missions that I'm working on in Africa, I will very well control who goes to Africa. I will not send anybody there who I don't feel is of the character and the consciousness that is necessary to facilitate the building of strong, tight, trustworthy, loyal relationships with our brothers and sisters on the continent. They are expecting to see people who conduct themselves like me with a strong Pan-African consciousness, a strong African identity. Those are the only types of folks I'm interested in who will be coming with me to Africa, because it is too dangerous, far too dangerous, to take people back there who are not ready to be African and fall in line with their brothers and sisters, who don't want to be worshipped for their education or treated differently because they're from America. We really have to check ourselves, because the post-traumatic slavery disease of the American Negro will reveal itself in Africa more than it has here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, if you are just joining us, we are talking to Dr. Umar Johnson. We're talking about China's footprint in Africa. This is the Empower Hour. We got a question, Brother Umar. Chinese men fathering the children in Africa and then leaving them. I've been hearing and reading a lot about that as of late. What's your thoughts surrounding that?
Well, since the beginning of time, any colonizer that has come to Africa has intentionally sought to reproduce with the African woman to create a class of people who are biologically African but psychologically loyal to their father's flag. The European Jew did it, the Portuguese did it, the French did it, the British did it. They all created this class of biracial Africans that would be loyal to the flag of their father's country. And that's what the Chinese are doing. So in 20 years from now, you're going to have a whole population of Chinese who will function as a black bourgeoisie against the indigenous African, who will be well-funded by China, in the interest of Chinese domination of the continent. The only way to stop that is for our sisters to stop reproducing with them, but the only way you're going to get black women to stop reproducing with them is if we empower the sisters over there, just like we need to empower the brothers with economic opportunity. Let's be clear. The reason black women are having sex with these Chinese men ain't because they consider the Chinese man attractive. It's because when they look at the Chinese man, they see an opportunity. And if they have a baby with the Chinese man, they see an opportunity. They say that this child is going to be well taken care of, and through my baby, I'll be able to improve my life. It all goes back to economic opportunity. You will not have this. It's a big problem in Nigeria as well. The Chinese having babies with the Nigerian woman. So you got these Chinese Nigerians running around, the Chinese Ghanaians running around. It's not going to stop until we empower brothers and sisters on the continent so they don't have to make a mockery of themselves to try to improve their quality of life.
Right. Good stuff. Well, we have a few minutes left. We're coming down to the wire for our program. Again, if you have any calls, give us a shout at 240-455-5934. Call us up. What's coming up for you, Brother Umar? You be in D.C.
What's
anytime
coming up for
soon?
me? Yes, well, we definitely have the 2 schools in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm asking all of your callers to please donate to the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy. We have 4 buildings, which includes 2 beautiful schools in Wilmington, Delaware, right off of 95 South. It will be the perfect metropolis for all black conscious activity. We have all the classrooms, we have the gyms, the whole street is ours. I'm telling you, we have a jewel in the FDMG in Delaware, but we got to restore those buildings. We need to raise $1 million to restore the entire campus, which is all 4 buildings. If we can raise $500,000, we can do 2 buildings. If we can raise $250,000, we can do 1 building. We just received our tax bill. We got to pay $20,000 to the city of Wilmington and $40,000 to the county of Newcastle, Delaware. So as we raise money, we're still, sending money out because bills do happen. We still have a water bill we got to pay even though we're not in there. We got an electric bill we got to pay even though we're not in there. We got a general maintenance bill that we have to pay, a storm water bill that we have to pay even though we're not in there. So as the monies come in, they're no longer just sitting because now we own the building. We do got bills. I'm paying a brother today to cut the grass. We got to keep the grass cut so we don't get a ticket for an unkept campus. So please donate. 3 ways to donate. One is through the Cash App, cash.me/$FDMG School. I repeat, cash.me/$FDMG School. Check a money order payable to the FDMG Academy, P.O. Box 9634, Wilmington, Delaware. That's P.O. Box 9634, Wilmington, Delaware 19809. And the other way they can donate is to just come to any of my lectures or events and just bring a check of money order there. I'll be in Orlando, Florida this Saturday, August the 31st, 4 o'clock in Sanford. Rest in peace to Trayvon Martin. Will be in Sanford, Florida, Saturday, August 31st at 4. Then I'll be in Nashville, Tennessee, Saturday, September the 7th. I'll be in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Saturday, September the 24th. And then it's over to Europe. I'll be in Brussels, Belgium, September the 28th. Then I will be in Memphis, Tennessee, October the 5th, Tulsa, Oklahoma, November the 2nd, Oklahoma City, November the 3rd. I'll be in Harlem, November the 10th. I'll be in Nat Turner Land for the ancestral celebration on the day Nat Turner was murdered, November 11th. That's 11/11. And if anyone needs to reach me, website, drumarjohnson.com. I now have a podcast website where I'm going to be putting updated talks that are not on YouTube, all new material. They can go to unapologeticallyafrican.com, unapologeticallyafrican.com, and we spell Africa with a K. There's one podcast up now on why you should never get your children evaluated for ADHD. I'll be uploading one soon on the Jay-Z NFL deal, and I'm just going to be putting a lot of new material up on the Unapologetically African site because YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, they love to censor my material. And my phone number, if folks need to reach me, schedule a consultation about their child, is 215-989-9858, 215-989-9858, or drumarjohnson.com.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm tired just hearing it. I ain't traveled out of city.
Busy man, busy man.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for all the work you do for our community. Appreciate you. And you storm through and you bust through all the haters. I've been hearing lately, when we put this up, people will ask him about the school. Where's the school? And I'm like, the school is there. I mean, that lets me know you're really not even paying attention. You're not focused in, because if you did, you wouldn't even be asking that question. You would know. You would know the answer.
And you know what it really comes down to, Queen? It comes down to people who don't want to see anyone create an institution because they haven't done it. And for a lot of them, once we succeed with this FDMG mission, everyone is automatically going to start looking to everyone else in the conscious community, and they'll say, Dr. Umar promised the school, he has the school. Now, what institution are you going to contribute to the community?
Hello?
That's why they don't want FDMG, because once FDMG gets built, everyone is going to now expect them to do more than just make YouTube videos.
Right. Good stuff. Well, we got a couple of calls that come. You got time to hang around for 2 more calls?
Sure.
All right. We're going to take these last 2 calls. Are you on the air? Hello? Caller?
Hello, I'm calling. Hello?
Hello, we can
Hello?
hear you, sir. Tell us where you're calling from and what's your question.
Hello, I'm calling from Maryland. I have a question for Brother Umar.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask him how he felt about all the killings and homicides that have been going on in the black community. Because right now we're leading the homicides in D.C., St. Louis. We've been leading the homicide over this country for real. It brings a question like, I support what he's doing and stuff like that. But like, instead of focusing our money on the school, I think we should be focusing our money on more of security protocols for our communities and food and water for our communities, because everybody's heard of the Newark water crisis and of course Flint. So I think a lot of our resources and time should be dedicated there, because you're going to need people to go to your school. And right now we're leading homicides. Baltimore is almost to 300, DC is almost to a 200, but St. Louis is about at 302. How are we going to have even have black people left to go to your school or even fund an army or anything like that? That's my question. Thank you.
Good question. When I first started raising money for the school, once we amassed $750,000, people said, well, is this the best use of the money? Shouldn't you be building an army? Shouldn't you be putting people to work? Shouldn't you be doing something else with this money? And my answer was no, that I'm supposed to be doing exactly what we are doing, which is building a school. And why is that? We have to remake the consciousness of African people. If you don't remake the consciousness of African people, you won't stop the black-on-black crime. If you don't remake the consciousness of African people, we will never be the distillers of our own water or the growers of our own food. Every problem that affects the American Negro is profoundly psychological. The Honorable Marcus Garvey said that if we could get to know ourselves today, we can have a new reality tomorrow. The Honorable Frederick Douglass said, so often we strike at the symptoms, but so rarely do we strike at the causes. The cause is the self-hate. The cause is the lack of an African consciousness. And so through the Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey Academy, we will be able to create a new consciousness that will prevent all the ills that you're speaking of from continuing. If you want to go out and build an army, build an army. But guess what? Those Negroes will be fighting each other in 5 years because they're still affected with self-hate. You want to go out and take on the brothers and stop the violence? Guess what? That's going to start a civil war. I think we have to do it, though, in order to protect our women and children. But we have to recognize that at the heart of this entire thing is a self-hate that has prevented us from unifying enough to address these problems. And so for me, there's no greater solution than the raising up of a new generation of revolutionary African children who know how to think, but more importantly, know how to work together and nation build.
Good teaching. Ashe, I agree.
We have one more caller.
We have one last caller on the line. Caller, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Tell us where you're calling from and what's your question, sir.
Yeah, I'm calling from Maryland, calling from PG County. This Pelu, you know me, I'm the security guard that used to work outside. But anyway, yeah, I'm making a comment about the last issue about the Liberians and people coming back to Africa. I was making a comment about that. That like me personally, I just want to address Dr. Umar and everybody else. I think the settlers who came back, a lot of times they get a bad rap. Like me personally, I'm one of the settlers. I mean, I'm not from a bear, but I'm from right next to in Sierra Leone, and my family, one of the settler families who came back to Africa. But it wasn't us who were coming back. You understand? And over there at that time, even to this day, in Africa itself, there isn't an African consciousness. So we went back in a world that was tribal. And you have to understand, it's not us trying to be Europeanized. It was a tribal. It's a tribal thing that we all have to deal with. So we have to address a type of detribalization of the African mind, so there can be African unity. There can be unity, and we still have a tribal. We still have a separated tribal mindset. So that's I think that's what needs to be focused on instead of who did what to who and what to what. It was, and when that really wasn't the case. It's a tribal world we came back to. We're still dealing with these things to this very day. I have families in Sierra Leone who get the house appropriated because they come from settler families and they want to discriminate against settler families as opposed to the tribal families and all the other stuff. So and that's one thing that always gets to me when I hear people talk about Liberia, Sierra Leone, and about settlers who come back, because they always take one side. They don't look at it objectively about the real objective history of what went on. They don't really look at it. They just have a narrative of people coming back and being Europeanized or some type of revisionist history instead of looking at objective history and see what the people are dealing with.
You're fading out
even back then.
Hello, you fading out.
What is that? Oh, fading out. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I just think people need to look back at those back to Africa moments, the ones that actually did, because nobody gives the credit for people actually went back, and people had to suffer to go back, and people don't understand that it's more complicatedness of them versus us or things like that. You have to deal with the whole tribal mentality of the Africans. And you understand back then they were selling the African even when the first settlers came back, they had to fight to survive and not get thrown back into slavery. But I people don't understand the history of the resettlement. So I think if people got to go back and objectively look at the history of resettlement to Africa, people who came back. That's my comment. I think the settlers always get unfair.
Okay, we got your point.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
basically,
what I'm hearing him say is that it's just a colonization of the mind on both sides.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. Dr. Umar, what do you say to that? Because it's connected to Alkama saying that they're trying to get here, we're trying to get over there. But I can see that even with some Africans that are continental Africans that come here, you know, a lot of times their focus is to get within close proximity of whiteness as much as possible. So what do you say to what he just said as far as Africans on the continent not even having a African consciousness themselves?
Right. Couple things, because I agree with a lot of what he said, but not all of what he said. First of all, there is African consciousness in Africa. Okay. It most certainly is. Pan-Africanism is very much alive in Africa. Okay, that's number one. Number two, there is an emphasis on tribal distinctions amongst those who don't have a Pan-African consciousness. So it becomes important for us to raise the Pan-African consciousness of everyone so that race first becomes our priority and not our tribal affiliation. You got to keep in mind, tribes are not biologically differentiated entities. Okay, when someone dies, there's no Ashanti bone, there's no Iwe bone, there's no Zulu bone, there's no Xhosa bone. You understand? There's just African bone.
Right.
You see. So there is some tribal consciousness there, but that is still secondary to the fact that Africa has been oppressed and that many of our people on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean are operating out of a disaster psychology, an emergency psychology, a psychology of desperation. We must be clear about something. Whoever controls the opportunities and the economics can remake the culture in 50 years. Put me in any country where I have unlimited access to wealth. I can change the language they speak. I can make the men hate the women. I can make the women hate the men. I can turn the boys into homosexuals. I can destroy the role of spirituality. I can stop making them eat vegetables and fish and make them eat all pork and chicken. Whoever controls the opportunities and the economics controls the culture. So when we talk about, well, you know, Africans don't like African Americans, or they got tribalism this, or they don't have an African consciousness, why is that? Because the people that are dictating the economy don't have the liberation of Africa as a priority. So that means that African Americans have to take our disposable income and stop spending $1 billion on McDonald's every year, and $2 billion on Air Jordans every year, and $4 billion on alcohol every year, and $20 billion on perm every year, and take that money to Africa and build institutions. Because guess what? If you go to Africa and open up a school, and you say, in this school, we only do natural hair, and if you work in this school, we never promote tribalism above Africanism. And in this school, we're going to eat a certain way. And in this school, we're going to treat the women a certain way. And the women are going to respect a certain way. In 20 years, you will have changed the behavior of everybody who lives in that village. But it all began with what? It began with your ability to offer opportunities to your people. He's correct. We will have a difficult time if we don't come with resources. If we're going to go to Africa with nothing to give or nothing to build, it will be a waste of time. In order to get people's attention, you must be able to feed them.
Good teaching. Ashe. Well, we're going to leave it right there.
Yeah.
That has been the Empower Hour, family. And Dr. Umar Johnson was our guest today. And China's footprint in Africa was the discussion. We welcome you to join us back again next Wednesday for another impactful topic of discussion that affects our everyday lives. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for your questions, your comments. Thanks for your shares. That's so highly important, family. The mission for Hanifa and I here on the Empower Hour is to get the word out, and we need your help to do that. And so for every share you offer on your social media streams helps us, all of us, get the word out to a larger pool of people. So thank you so much.
The YouTube. If you're missing
if you're missing the channel live, or you want to go back and see the playback video, find us on YouTube under Miss Free the People. That's MS Free the People, all one word. And until next week, family, take care of each other out there. Peace.